Thank you all for joining us on this Akaroa vintage tasting. This is a new foray for us into virtual catch-ups. Exciting to have you all here. Just for everybody's sake again, I'll just repeat my name. I'm Ben Leen. I'm the assistant winemaker at Amisfield.
And I'm Mike Winter, the viticulturist at Peregrine.
So Mike and I will keep things running today as moderators. What we really want to get out of this session is to hear everybody's thoughts on the wines they've been sent. We've got, as you know, you've got wines from Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from the 2020 vintage, and a selection of white varietals from the 2021 vintage. Each of those vintages showing very unique characteristics, and the way we've separated the wines out is by sub-region. What we hope to achieve in our discussion with you guys and to hear from your thoughts from the wines is sort of taking a deeper dive of sorts into sub-regionality. I'll just run through quickly so everybody that's listening is clear on which reviewer received what wines. So Bob Campbell will be first cab off the rank, and he was given all wines from Bannockburn sub-region. Sam Kim was given wines from Bendigo, Northburn and Alexandra. Cameron Douglas was given wines from the Cromwell Basin and beyond, which stretches through Pisa and as far as Gibson, Queensbury and Wanaka. And then Candice, who we'll be finishing up with, received wines that are sub-regional blends. So I guess before we get into things, I think what we're hoping to achieve with today's session, it's exciting to have you all here virtually. Obviously, it would have been amazing to host you here today, particularly. It's a ripping Central Otago day down here, not a cloud in sight. Plenty of growing degree days to be had today, but unfortunately, with the situation we're in, virtually is the route we have to take. But it's great to have you all here. I was just saying to the others earlier, it's not often we get a chance to do a group discussion like this, even when we're meeting in person. So it's really cool, and we're really grateful that you've given up your time to not only review these wines and make some notes on the classes you've been sent, but also to share your thoughts and comments online. So for those that have joined and are listening at the moment, the way we wanted to set out this discussion tasting was really in a hope to weave some sort of tapestry through the sub-regions of Central Otago. I think it's indicative of the region and where our heads are at in Central Otago and dialing into sub-regionality. And nice to also finish off with a class of blends from all sub-regions or multiple sub-regions. So I think it's a great overview of what is coming out of Central Otago at the moment from two really exciting vintages. I'll hand over in a second to Mike to do a bit of a background and context of the two vintages we're tasting from, and then we'll start getting into a chat. Does everyone sound okay with that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. Mike.
All right, the 2020 vintage. So this is what we refer to as the COVID vintage, that dreaded word that we've all heard too much of recently. And so this presented a number of challenges for us, not only from a social distancing point of view, also from a seasonal point of view. So it was a particularly cold season. We had lower GDDs, 97 lower than average. Cold and wet spring. We had some localised hail events, which caused quite significant damage across localised areas throughout the region. And we thought when that was happening that having 10 minutes longer, it could have been the end of the season for us. But we got through that okay, and we managed to get some good fruit out of it. We had drawn out flowering. We had some hen and chicken, which provided a bit of those sweet and sour characters towards harvest. Generally speaking, harvest was excellent. It was cool and calm, excellent ripening conditions. We had dewy nights, but the cool nights allowed us to maintain our acid. We had great hang time. We didn't have any frosts through harvest. It was very calm. There wasn't a lot of wind damage. So the fruit was in excellent condition, and disease pressure was low during harvest. So that allowed us to hang the fruit out there longer and keep it in excellent condition, allowed us to get that flavour ripeness right through to where we wanted it, and make picking decisions based on flavours rather than a depleting canopy, if you like. Excellent concentration, excellent intensity. The acids were fantastic because we had cool nights. And personally, one of the best harvests I've seen in terms of flavours in the vineyard. So it was fantastic. The yields were down a little bit, and it was perhaps a blessing for a lot of growers with smaller bunches. As we saw some cool temperatures, we thought perhaps if we had higher yields, we may not have managed to get them across the line. But it was a fantastic winemaker's vintage with lower yields, excellent flavours, and certainly one to remember from a COVID point of view, but also one to remember from an excellent flavour, intensity and concentration of fruit point of view. 2021 was another good year. It was slightly warm and dry spring. We had some late November frost events which caused a few issues around the region. Towards the end of the season and throughout the season, and harvest in particular, we had some significant wind events which caused a lot of leaf shatter, and that also brought forward some of those packing decisions in various regions due to the depleting canopy. We had a much warmer autumn than we had in 2020, and the concern was around acids dropping away too quickly towards harvest. Some growers noted disease issues throughout the season due to some quite significant rain events that occurred over the Christmas and New Year period. But we managed to, if you stayed on top of your canopy management, keep the canopy nice and open, then disease wasn't an issue. So lower acids, as I mentioned, were more of a challenge for winemakers, but generally speaking, the flavours were very good. Not the concentration we had in 2020, but still a fantastic and potentially standout vintage as far as we were concerned. Yields were up on 2020, which kept many growers much happier. So 21% up on 2020. And what we found, it was very isolated. There were some lower yields depending on sub-region. Bendigo was up on average. So it was varied, quite varied across the whole region. But overall, some really excellent results out of that vintage. Another challenging season. It gets a bit boring if we don't have a good few challenges, so it keeps us viticulturists happy. And we were happy with the wine once it was in the shed, and the flavours looking good.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. There's a great overview of two very different vintages. Super excited to hear everybody's thoughts on the wines. We've had a few extra people just join in the last minute or so. So again, just briefly, we're going to run through each reviewer's wines, the wines that they tasted, and the comments and thoughts that they've gathered, particular themes that they might have seen from the different sub-regions. And then we'll have a bit of time at the end for a group discussion. Sam, Cameron, Bob and Candice, please feel free to jump in with questions as we go throughout the session. And in the group discussion, if time allows, we'll open up to the Kawa members that have joined us for the chat, and they may have questions of their own for particular reviewers. Again, thank you for your time, guys. We'll lead off with Bob Campbell and the Bannockburn sub-region. Bob, just before you start, I was just going to run through the individual wines that you were sent so that the members are aware, and then I'll leave it up to you to formulate your thoughts, and up to you as to whether you want to start with the 2021s or the 2020s. So going in order, Bob's wines were Bald Hills 3 Acres Pinot Noir 2020, Carrick the Magnetic Pinot Noir, Dicey Wines Pinot Noir, Domain Road Vineyard Pinot Noir, Felton Road Calvert Pinot Noir, Kano Pinot Noir, Valli Bannockburn Vineyard Pinot Noir, Wild Earth and Sky Pinot Noir, and there are 2 Chardonnays from the 2020 vintage, the Carrick Chardonnay and the Felton Road Block 2 Chardonnay. Would you like to start with those, Bob?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I actually started with the whites and rosé, and then moved into the reds. And
happy for you to do that, and maybe we just keep that as the theme across for all four people. Is that okay? And I'll just read out your 21s, Bob.
Okay. I started with the 2020 Chardonnay. We had wines from Felton Road and Carrick. I was a little bit skeptical before I started to see as to whether it's a small group, you know, 2 wines, whether that was going to throw up a pattern or not. Give me an indication of the vintage. It was a cool vintage, and so I expected higher, greener acidity, which I didn't find. Although the acids I thought I described as vibrant, I certainly wouldn't label them as unripe. I thought there was a good level of ripeness. Quite a lot of Lee's influence in the Carrick wine, and which I think to some extent obscures the sort of fruit character. But I liked it. I liked the mouthfeel. And Felton Road showed really nice intensity. In fact, both wines showed good intensity, and power, which I guess was fairly predictable with the way the vintage panned out. Going now to the Pinot Gris, we had 2, one from Domain Road and one from Dicey. I thought they both had good ripeness levels and good varietal definition. There's no doubt about the grape variety we were dealing with there. Not bad sugar acid balance. Although, and perhaps this is a style choice rather than a vintage influence, but I thought I would have liked to have seen a little bit sort of more energy and minerality, perhaps a little bit of drier style. Well, particularly on the Domain Road, and a little bit more energy and just sort of tighten them up, express that, which I think is the essence of Central Otago white, particularly Pinot Gris. You like that sort of line of acidity and brightness and energy, which
I think with a cool vintage, it's that managing that acidity and how that's managed either with sugar balance or texture from time on lees. So there'll be an element, you've probably seen it in the Chardonnay as well. You mentioned the intensity, but the acid not being so prominent from a cold vintage. So I think it's that winemaker's decision how to handle the balance of that equation.
Actually, moving now to the 21 Mount Difficulty Sauvignon, I thought quite a luscious varietal wine, very tropical, you know, the tropical end of the spectrum, a real crowd pleaser, I thought, and perhaps 2 or 3 grams of residual sugar, less 2 or 3 grams of residual sugar would have pleased my palate a little more, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone. So you've got to make it for the market, I guess. And it did sort of reflect a ripe year. It showed good flavor ripeness there, which which follows on from the well, it wasn't a hot year, but it was a low yielding year, and I think that probably helped the concentration. Going now to rosé, we've got the 2021 vintage Bald Hills rosé and Mount Difficulty rosé. Both, just to make a comment on the color, they're both quite deeply tinted, which is interesting. In my experience, the feedback I get from the students in my classes and other people I meet when we discuss rosé is the paler the better. People just tend to like to go for those really fairly pale and ethereal looking looking wines. So
yeah, it's one of those parts of winemaking you have to navigate in terms of the probably the only style that is purchased on color and shade and hue. And I think what is good to see is a spectrum from very pale right through to the darker end, which for me, knowing that dark doesn't mean sweet, which is obviously a common misconception, but some of those darker ones having that savory or herbal edge, which for me can offer flexibility and variability with food pairing. So it's an interesting one, when maybe we all expect all rosés to be fairly pale, but it's great to see such a variety in shade across the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't the case for these two wines because they were both fairly tinted. What have I got here? Good flavor. I thought good flavor intensity, and vibrant acidity, and nice use of peppery phenolics. They didn't intrude too much, but they did give a little bit of structure and backbone to both wines. I thought the Bald Hills was quite a gutsy rosé. It wasn't a shrinking violet, if you like, and Mount Diff also was fairly gutsy. I sort of possibly prefer them to a little trimmed down, but with a touch more acidity. But that's a subjective call.
Yeah, I think. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it does go. It shows that there is stylistically quite a variation across the approach to rosé, which can, with all parts of the spectrum offering different aspects to the rosé drinker. So those are the groupings of the whites and the rosé, Bob. Can we move on to the 2020s? And I think with the Pinots particularly, what would be great is to maybe not go through individual wines, but for you to sort of gather those comments and notes and see if for us to pull out any sub-regional themes or things you've noticed from a particularly unique vintage.
Okay, well, I've done a little bit of pre-SWOT on this, and I really am responding to the list of questions that you could potentially. The first one I've talked about, what are the distinguishing characteristics of the Pinot? So I haven't talked about individual wines here, just as a group, which I think.
Sure, thank you. Yeah.
I thought a good depth of color. I thought the vintage showed plenty of color, more intensity, and sort of firmly structured wines. And that, I guess, is that small berry thing translating into intensity. It didn't apply to all wines. I thought just. Do you want me to avoid?
Oh no, just for the sake of time, it'd be nice to sort of. But you feel free to use examples, but just to for generalizations and to keep things going.
All right. Well, I thought thought that Kano. I'm not pronouncing that very well.
Kano, yep, Kano.
I thought that was pitch perfect. I thought that it had structure and just everything sort of nicely balanced. I thought that was an example of what I would say sort of classic Bannockburn. So I pulled that one out.
And what's your classic Bannockburn?
Sorry? What was it?
Your classic Bannockburn, Bob. Could you expand on that?
How would I describe my classic Bannockburn? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. I think sort of good fruit intensity without being sort of super fruit bomb. So it does have to have structure. It does have to have a future. You know, in other words, some sort of whole bunch spiciness. An element of that can actually work very well without destroying typicity. It actually can make a better wine and amplify the sort of Bannockburnness, I think. Yeah, that's sort of, and then you get into that. There's so many sub-regional differences too. You know, if you look at that map, thank you very much for sending me that map of Bannockburn, by the way. It's kind of interesting to have that. But when you look at the map, you realize what a range of terroirs it is, and how the region is reasonably big. But then the next thing oh, here we go. No, the next thing I responded to was how it compared to previous vintages. I think it asked.
Yep.
Along those lines. I thought that probably the 2017 vintage, which is actually a favorite of mine, would be the one I'd see is closest to the 220. You know, to me, I thought that the 2017, 2019, sort of a little bit of a wet vintage, challenging, but wine's better than expected, certainly better than I expected. And I thought there, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. I remember talking to a French winemaker in Burgundy, and he was saying it's always puzzled him how he makes his best wines in off vintages, and he thinks he perhaps gets a bit complacent when everything's too easy, and tries a little bit harder. And I wonder whether that might have been the case with the 2019, because there was a few problems with that vintage, and yet the wines to me didn't really show that. Like similarly, 2018, a hot vintage, which was surprisingly good. I thought that was going to burn off flavor, and we'd have some issues there, but they didn't really surface. In 2017, another one where I think the crop was down. I think the low yields really lifted the game there, just produced some surprisingly good wines. I've got a lot of favorites from that vintage. So yeah, so I thought that was yeah, that was a good one. What element, you asked me, what element had the most effect that I think had the most influence on the 2020 vintage? And I think it's the low yield. I think that lower yield really impacted in terms of concentration and structure too. And I think a low yield like that, you've got to be a little bit careful you don't overwork the wines, because they can be a little bit tough. Certainly that with a bit of age they might come right, but so the low yield. The other question, any change in winemaking reflected in these wines? That's an interesting question. It was actually, I should say as an aside, I found tasting these wines with all these questions in mind really was a very useful thing for me. It sort of explored areas, and it helped me focus on issues that I might have overlooked otherwise. So change in winemakers, I thought, I wondered whether the structures varied, and I wondered whether it might not have been a vintage to back off as I said, the whole bunch stuff a little bit to try and not overwork the wines. There were some fairly structured wines, so not a big problem, but certainly on the high side. And I thought, just on a very positive note, I thought the oak handling was really good. Everyone seems to have got on top of that now. There's no no issues at all coming through with the range of wines that I looked at yesterday. What does the market or expect? You know, that's an interesting thing from Central Otago Pinot, from Bannockburn Pinot, I should say. I think they expect quality and consistency, and I don't think they expect longevity, but I think that's something that it would be nice to demonstrate an ability to age. I know it's early days yet, but and put that in as part of the mix too. I think we're perhaps seeing a bit of that, seeing wines that in the medium term, I guess, can age quite well. But I think that's the next area to conquer. Climate change, do I see an influence there? Climate change is certainly impacting. We are seeing it, and I think it affects the more marginal, the cooler sub-regions, like for instance Gibbston or Alexandra. You know, we're seeing quite a change, quite a sea change in those wines from those sub-regions, whereas the warmer sub-regions like Bannockburn, like I shouldn't be talking about these other sub-regions. I'm supposed to talk about
that's okay.
Yeah, but with those the warmer sub-regions, you can deal with climate change a little bit through canopy management, etc. Whereas the cooler regions, I thought sub-regions are definitely responding positively to climate change, I think, and I can't see much many negative effects in the remainder. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble.
No, that's okay.
Climate change. Do consumers have a strong opinion of Central Otago wine? I think consumers regard Pinot Noir, Central Otago, as being producing the best region for Pinot Noir. I think that's a generally accepted impression, but it's a bit of a one-horse race. I think the other varieties, you know, Riesling, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, etc., sort of fall off the map a little bit. I mean, Pinot Noir is such a dominant force that it does tend to, the others dip out a little bit. So I suppose there's some opportunity there to raise the profile of Central Otago's other great varieties. Yeah. Are wines worth a premium price? This is an interesting one.
Loaded question.
Yeah. The acid testers, that's right. The acid testers, do they sell, I guess? Are there large stocks of unsold wines around? And only you can answer that. I don't know. I do know that the focus should be certainly on adding value to the wines, to the brand, rather than discounting the brand. I think that would be a fatal move. I think so. Hold your firm on price and add value. How could you do better in promoting the region? And I have to say, Central Otago promotional abilities are the envy of all other New Zealand wine regions. So I think what you're doing is effective, and that's pretty obvious through the rising demand for particularly Pinot.
Yeah.
I've run out of questions now, so.
No, Bob, that's great. No, yeah. We could have wrote loads more questions and listened to you answer as well. Actually, really appreciate that insight into your thoughts on the wines, and then also on top of that, you know, where we're heading and what we're having to think about, and how you see the wines coming, particularly Pinot Noir, coming out of Bannockburn now, and hopefully that you know extrapolates to the other sub-regions too. I think your comments around oak handling the finesse of a cool vintage. I think, you know, as we age as a sub-region and now have that many more notches on our belt from different vintages that have thrown different climatic conditions at us, I think that handling of oak and extraction and knowing, you know, you've alluded to the 2017 vintage, which was very similar to 2020 in terms of growing degree days and how vintage rolled out. I think those vintages with small berries, small bunches, knowing that is going to give intensity of flavor and color, and how to maximize that and retain that, and use tools like oak, etc., to just layer in and make a overall delicious and example of Central Otago Pinot Noir. So great to hear your thoughts on Bannockburn as a sub-region. Go Bob.
Yeah, I was just going to say I should have added that I'm a fan of Bannockburn. I call it Central Otago's sweet spot, which I think it is probably less today than it was a decade ago, because everything else is coming up. You know, we're starting to see really muscle flexing from other sub-regions too. But one thing that Bannockburn has got that is a great asset to them, and that's a hero in terms of Felton Road, because it's such a high profile and they do things so well. I'm not talking about making as well as marketing, that it really just helps to lift the whole sub-regional image. I think that's a powerful force.
Yeah, well, I think that analogy of the muscle flex, I hope that I'd like to think that we're all flexing our muscles at the same time to be quite a strong region, and hopefully, well, I think you've seen that in the 2020s from Bannockburn, and also the examples you mentioned from 2021, which is another exciting vintage, which will be, once we get to releasing Pinot Noirs, would be good to take a look at those too in a deep dive. So thanks again, Bob, for your comments. That's great. We'll all join in as a group in a discussion at the end. Now we'll hand over to Sam. Sam, I'll just run through your wines quickly, and then happy for you to take over with the 2021s and then finish with the 2020 Pinot Noir. So from 2021, Sam received Immigrant's Vineyard Ruru Pinot Gris, Kano Rosé, Quartz Reef Bendigo Pinot Gris, Misha's Vineyard Limelight Riesling, Gibson Valley Pinot Gris GV Collection, Mouldy Point Pinot Gris. And from the 2020 vintage, Sam received the Immigrant's Vineyard Ruru Pinot Noir, Mouldy Point Estate Pinot Noir, Quartz Reef Bendigo Single Ferment Pinot Noir, Cloudy Bay Tiwahi Pinot Noir, Misha's Vineyard the High Note Pinot Noir, along with a couple of 2020s whites from Prophet's Rock, their Van der Pay and their Dry Riesling. And sorry, before Sam starts, I just clarify that all those wines that Sam received were from either Bendigo, Northburn or Alexandra. Go for it, Sam. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Ben. And thanks again for the opportunity to taste the wines and join the group. Unlike Bob, who's done wonderful homework, I was just going to wing it today, but I had a minor panic attack last night, so I went through my notes again and tried to form some sort of opinion. Starting with the 2021 whites, mostly Pinot, they're all Pinot, Pinot Gris, and as Bob said, you know, Pinot Gris, like unlike Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris is such an unsung hero of the region, and considering that Pinot Gris, most of the Pinot Gris consumed in New Zealand are, you know, easygoing, fruity, juicy, refreshing style, without any sort of a funky notes, and selling at $15. So Central Otago Pinot Gris, most of them are seriously good and textural and concentrated, and some with that sort of a wonderful complexity coming through. And I saw them in this lineup there, and what a jewel that once the more consumers discover the seriousness of the Pinot Gris, that you can have it with the richer food or perhaps cellar for several years to develop greater complexity rather than just having it with a easy meal. And the only 2020. Oh, there was a Professor of Dry Riesling was 2020. And obviously, stylistically, they make into really firm, structured Riesling with, excuse me, a great complexity and flinty notes. While the Michels Vineyard is all about purity, and the 2021 is just amazing, just starting gracefully, exquisitely graceful. So look forward to seeing those two wines develop in time. 2020 Pinots, as you said, slightly cooler vintage. But again, I didn't see any sort of unripe characters, mind you. These are, high quality producers too. And great fruit purity, really ripe. And certainly from Bendigo, you expect slightly riper, and certainly I saw the sweet berry fruit coming through without being, overripe and overblown. And I wondered whether, because of the vintage, whether winemakers, you might want to make a comment later, they pull back on the whole bunch, perhaps less of whole bunch this year on 2020, and whether I was just sort of imagining, didn't see too much of that, whole bunch characters coming through. But overall, the balance is really great. None of them are extracted. Tannins are fine and polished. But what I really loved about 2020 is just the purity of the fruit, really sweet, perfumed, and just delightful already. And I'm sure they will develop pretty well too.
Yeah, I think that, again, touching on what Bob said as well as what you've mentioned, Sam, is that I think that handling and understanding what a cool vintage offers you in terms of fruit. Mike might be able to give you an idea of how small the bunches were in 2020. Mike,
Yeah, we were 28% down in 2020, so particularly small. As I mentioned in that vintage introduction there, as you touched on briefly, Sam, is we had the ability to let it hang and get those flavours and excellent structure and good balance. The acids were maintained. Some of those warmer areas, such as Bendigo, where we get those really ripe fruit characters, they were well balanced by that acid. So those yields certainly worked in our favour in producing that excellent balance and texture and structure.
Yeah, I think all viticulturalists and winemakers will tell you that no vintage is the same, which is 100% correct, and what makes this industry so exciting from March through to May. But I think, Sam, you mentioned the fruit or the pristine characters, not only in the Michels example of the Riesling, but also across the Pinot Noir. So it's that choosing to highlight that from a cool vintage is, from a winemaking perspective, you're almost forced down that path because of the intensity of the flavor and the relatively high acidity. But it's then working with what you've got, whether it's extraction while it's in tank or cooperages or percentage oak. I think we're all just developing that much more knowledge around how to handle different vintages, but also what to do and what to present when the wines are out in the market. Sam, do you mind? Do you mind just also addressing, if you can, any other aspects of the wines from Bendigo and Alex and Northburn, like maybe from how the 2020s compared to previous vintages, or anything other factors of note from the wines you've tasted?
Yeah, sure. Just also, I was thinking about the Bendigo as a sub-region, and Central Otago, as we all know, come a long way and evolved. The vines matured, and winemakers obviously more experienced in viticulture as well. But I do come across some consumers who discovered Central Otago Pinot Noirs in the early 2000s or perhaps the late 90s, when Central Otago was really blossoming, and they remember those richer, darker almost Syrah-like Pinots. I think 2002, I think was a monster vintage, and particularly from Bendigo, you can get a really big, gutsy Pinots, and some consumers still reminisce about those kind of big monsters, and ask, why don't I make Pinots like that? And then I say, well, Pinot's not supposed to be like that. But whether consumers' expectation of, say, regions like Bendigo, they want bigger, richer style. And when you do look at across a region of the same vintage, you do see the sub-regional differences, but perhaps they are not as pronounced as before. I think it's for me, Central Otago as a whole region, and certainly sub-regional producers, is that I think the task is to continue to educate Pinot Noir drinkers, and the new Pinot Noir drinkers, they understand the subtleties and variations, but sort of people who want those bigger, richer style, we need to continue to promote that regional differences, as well as Central Otago. It's not about big, fruit bombs anymore. There are a lot of subtleties and nuances. So yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing more consumers joining that evolution of Central Otago Pinots. Yeah,
it's an exciting time to have, not just fruit bombs or not just big Pinots out there. I think it's indicative of where the region is at, and highlighting site and sub-region, or using sub-region and site as a blending tool if you're making sub-regional blends. So I think it's that really important stage where we're developing our knowledge and skills as viticulturalists and winemakers to best express the sites that we're working with, and then hoping that education and then that aspect of what people know or want to learn about the sub-regions and Central Otago as a whole, hopefully they all sort of meet at the same point and evolve in that way. So, and I think we're doing, as a region, I think we're doing a great job of integrating sub-regionality into the consumers' minds, but at the same time, as an overall, flexing our muscles as Central Otago, making sure that we highlight the best of what this region has to offer. Well, thanks, Sam. That was great little insight, and we'll get you back in for the group discussion shortly. We will move over to Cameron Douglas now. Hi, Cam. Thanks for waiting. Cameron was, when I was tasked with grouping these wines into sub-regions, it was a job in itself just to try and put things together. It might sound relatively easy, but then there was a category where I've just kind of kindly phrased Cromwell Basin and beyond, which extends from the Cromwell Basin right down to Gibson, as well as all the way down to Wanaka. So Cameron's probably got the most varied sub-regional wines, and I'll read through your list, Cameron, and then I'll hand it over to you. So from the 2021 vintage, the rosés and the whites, Cameron received the Akaroa 25 Steps Rosé, Wooing Tree Blondie, Wooing Tree Rosé, Hawkshead Rosé, Hawkshead Pinot Blanc, Amisfield Rosé, Maud, Mount Maud East Block Riesling, Arquitu Pinot Noir Blanc, and Domaine Thompson Surveyor Thompson Rosé. And from the 2020 vintage of Pinot Noir, Cameron received Wooing Tree Pinot Noir, Wooing Tree Sandstorm Reserve Single Vineyard Pinot Noir, Gibson Valley Diamond Pinot Noir, Mount Michael Pinot Noir, Nanny Goat Vineyard Pinot Noir, and the Valli Gibson Vineyard Pinot Noir. So I'll hand that over to you, Cam, to formulate your thoughts and comments.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Thank you. I guess my approach to this was a little bit different based on where this sub-regional question was coming from. And the first thing I did was do my own little, in my mind, Google Earth tour around the Gibbston and then swung through and around the other side, basically into the Cromwell Basin, and hugging essentially what is ultimately the same mountain range. And that sort of drove me into asking the question about specific site and the general overview. And so my research that I did actually came up with a figure that Central Otago is 98% aspect value based in terms of its vineyard locations. And so, and I had to sort of, what does that mean? So I looked at a couple of graphs, and essentially Central Otago is northeast, mostly facing with that aspect value loaded into that. And if you compared that with Marlborough, which is only 52% aspect based, and Hawke's Bay 50% aspect based, there is a strong drive to make sure that the site is an important component and has an impact on sub-regional signatures, but region overall as well. The other figure that I came up with or discovered was that Central Otago is 77% Pinot Noir driven. And it raises the question, where did that actually come from? And whether that's insight, foresight, or desire, I don't know, but it's now a runaway success in terms of that particular variety. So I had to look at soil and break that down to see if that had an impact. And it really sort of came down to four things: to soil, which was glacial gravels driven and schist driven soils, and then what age were those soils. And you know, the consumer doesn't care about the age of the soil, but it it brings up the idea of what influence that might have ultimately on variety and soil condition. And everything sort of is in this deep ocean floor substructure that came up ultimately, and that it's between 542 million years old down to as recent as 145 million years old. So there's this big overall picture of aspect and soil and site that has to have this influence on the wines that I'm tasting. So I got 7 rosés, and I tried to group them from the Gibbston coming around into the Cromwell area and Pisa and just beyond. And the summary from this, considering, you know, soil and aspect, was that I seem to get this consistent, clean, fresh approach to the rosés. I got bold fruit statements, but the one thing that seemed to come through more consistently was this fine, savory seam. And I attribute that mostly to the rugged area, the rugged foundation that is the mountains and Cromwell and over in the Gibbston. But also looking at minerality, what did I discover? And when you sort of peel back the fruit aspect of rosé, what is there underneath? And for me, the same word in my vernacular kept coming up, and that was stony minerality, silica as a flavor for me, and just this gentle mineral voice just driving through the wines. But all of that you can only discover when you peel back the fruit that is rosé. And incidentally, Bob mentioned, you know, the color of rosé seemed to be favored the paler side. And I've done a reasonable amount of reading on this, and of course there's no guidebook to the color of rosé, so I would encourage the producers just to do what is best for the wine rather than be driven by color. But globally the trend is to paler wines, and what used to be about a 60% onion skin salmon color for rosé has gone up to about 77%. So the trend is towards that paler color, rightly or wrongly. Then I got to try just 2 white wines really, which was the Pinot Blanc from Hawkshead and the Maud Mount Maud Riesling, and these were all 21 so far. So again, it's hard to really form a picture with just 2 wines from 2 different sub-regional areas. but I think that the first three words in my descriptors that I wrote down was clean, fresh, aromatic, and precise. And I think that that has to speak to sub-regionality as well as very, very good winemaking. The Pinot Blanc was a little more salty, mineral, silica, and had that savory, spicy seam through it. And then the Mount Maud Riesling was just this deep mineral core of fruit, and I couldn't get more excited about a wine like that, but it just had this wonderful, and I wrote the word natural and alive down, and I think that that speaks to Central Otago wines, but also sub-regionality as well, that the winemaking team, and I guess the viticultural team, hold on to this natural aspect of wine, and I think that's part of the story moving forward. I had 6 Pinot Noir in total. They all were from the 2020 vintage. And I've got lots of summary notes about this if I'm asked of it later on. But I think there was one comment that Sab made that what about this old school style peppery, big, bold expression of Pinot Noir of time gone by. And I saw that in one of these wines, which I'll get to in a second because I don't want to detract from the quality. But essentially, what did I find here was every single wine here spoke of place. There is complexity, but that speaking of place can only come through if you don't overdo things in the winery. And what I mean by that is there was a complexity to these wines, but the pinosity, what I call pinosity, which is that delicate purity, that wonderful sense of sweet fruit, was showing through in all of these wines. Coming back to that sub-regional side of things, I did Gibston first. I did the Valli and the Gibston Valley Pinot Noir. Well, I did the Gibston wine from Valli first because the Gibston Valley is from Pisa. But again, there was this ruggedness to the wine, which is the raw, real personality that I saw. The dried herbs, savory, then the red fruits, berries came through, and that dried herb component, which I think is a sub-regional thing of Gibston that I like to find. And in great years, you always get this wonderful sort of bulbous core of fruit, which I found delightful. The 2 Pisa wines, or the 2 dedicated Pisa wines, which was the Gibson Valley and the Mount Michael. The Gibson just had that more delicate, fragrant purity there. It was precise, but it didn't hold back on the minerality. And with the Mount Michael, I think what I found was just this fine, stony, crushed quartz underlying story. And I think, to give it a theme, there's an underlying story here, and the opportunity to capture that sense of place should not be let go. Then the 2 wooing trees I did side by side, and the standard wooing tree I preferred over the more expensive of the 2 wines because it was seamless. It had much more sense of place about it, and it tasted great in palate feel, and I think palate feel was great for a wine like that. The Sandstorm was the one that I thought was a little bit overdone because it almost lost a bit of its sense of place because it had too much of that pepperiness and that darker fruit combination. But again, once you peel back that fruit and look a little more closely, there is that sense of place does start to come through. So it wasn't lost entirely. And the last one I tried was the Nanny Goat, because that was the furthest north in the Queensbury area. And again, precise, clean, pure fruit up front on the nose. And then that silica thing kept coming back to me. It's like there's a minerality in this wine, and that is the sub-regional component for the Nanny Goat. And then there was this savory, wild, rugged component as well. And when you think about that area, there's big open, wide open spaces, and it's surrounded by this wonderful, natural, untouched environment. So Can I continue? Just a couple
Yes,
more.
of course.
Yeah,
Cameron, yeah, great.
My summary of the rosé, and I wrote this out, was that minerality was noted on all wines. There was some kind of silica clay-like flavor that once you peeled the fruit back, it was there. All of the wines ultimately had a fine savory note about them, which I think speaks to Central Otago as well as sub-regionality. The handling of fruit tannins and extraction, and I've said don't be afraid to explore this more, because I think when you get a great vintage like I found 19s very good, 20s and 21s particularly good, then when you've got a wonderful core of fruit, then you can spread your wings a little bit more and load in those tannins and buck the trend, not necessarily in color, but rosé from Central Otago and the collection of subregions can be more expressive, and don't hold back on that, I think. My summary of the two white wines were, these are two varieties that need to be explored more. Pinot Blanc is always underrated, of course, and loses in favor of Pinot Gris, but I think vine age is benefiting that. More Riesling, please. What can I say? It's just fantastic stuff. I want to buy that. Pinot Noir really is the hero, of course, and you can't not have that hero. But I noted, what did I say about Pinot Noir? Let the vineyard do most of the talking, and this trend that I'm seeing with winemakers in that region, where there's a little bit less hands on, so more hands off, seems to be benefiting the wine. And it's not that you're pushing into this natural wine movement. I think it's naturally going into more hands-off approach, and I think the wines are benefiting from that. I think that you should always be ticking the box of quality first and quantity second, and I understand the challenge of economies of scale in saying that as well, because you're in the wine business, and the business of being in the wine business is to make wine and sell it. So I guess my final summary of the Pinot Noir is that let site drive first. Site is where it's at for the future, and that let the site drive the producer's decision, the winemaker's decision, and that the sub-regional signature is, I think the box is slowly opening. It's not a race, it's just slowly opening to show sub-regionality. Yeah. I've got an answer to all of those questions, but that might come later.
Yeah, we'll cover off some of those a bit later, but thanks, Cameron. It was one heck of an insight, and great homework, by the way. That was really interesting to just, as you were speaking, I was sort of visually flying like a Google Earth fly through. So yeah, that was great. Thank you. And I think, you know, in your summaries of both the whites, pinks, and the Pinots, what I think is clear, very clear, obviously, is that I think that approach of being respectful to site, and a vintage with the Pinot Noir from something like 2020, which was pretty unique, is sort of embracing that nuance of acidity. And, you know, you've mentioned silica and minerality across all examples that you tried, and I think that's just part of all that is just this journey of discovery we're on. And I think that well, you've been in the region 7 years now, Mike. You're probably nearly 10 years, are you?
9 years, yeah.
9 years. So I think it's that comfort around understanding your site and knowing what we want to get from it, whether you're, you know, in the vineyard or in the winery. I think it's that collective knowledge of the vintages that have gone by, and now you mentioned that sort of hands off, and I think I totally agree. And I think it's that it's an element of respect and trust and understanding, and it's a super exciting position to be in down here as we dive into sub-regionality. So thank you again, Cameron. We'll bring you in for some of those questions in the group discussion. And I think it lends nicely into Candice and the category of sub-regional blends, which, you know, to me, equally as important. And I see, as we've discussed particular sub-regions up to now, I see in sub-regional blends the benefit of using those as a blending tool, and to eke out whether it's fruit and sweet fruited, or the finesse of Bannockburn, or the pristine of the Cromwell Basin and the Valley floor, or some of those floral and bigger flavors from Bannockburn, from Bendigo, sorry. So Candice, I will read through your wines that you were given, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Yep.
Okay, so Candice was sent from 2021 the Mount Michael Pinot Noir Rosé, the Peregrine Rosé, the Peregrine Sauvignon Blanc, and the Rockburn Stolen Kiss. And then from the 2020 vintage, Candice was sent the Akaroa Pinot Noir, the Wild Earth Pinot Noir, Nanny Goat Vineyard Super Nanny, Central Otago Pinot Noir, the Rockburn Pinot Noir, and the Maud Central Otago Pinot Noir. Candice, it's all yours.
Thanks for having me. This sub-regional blend, I thought it was one of the harder ones to look at because they're blending from different sub-regions. And I've got one bottle of Sauvignon Blanc. So that is Peregrine, which they have 60% from Bendigo and 40% from Cromwell. It's a very savory style, quite nicely leased, and you still get those tropical pineapple, lime and nettles, that really good varietal characters. I think when I look at these wines, it's more showing me the winemaker's decision of how they really wanting to make the wine, actually. But from this wine's impression, that like you really see the concentration of of the wine, and really good acidity, but they're not too much. It's not like a very cold vintage. It is just very integrated, a really nicely sweet acidity, and a little bit of phenolics in the wine to add to the texture of the Sauvignon Blanc. And then I have 3 rosés. They're all quite different, where the fruit come from and how they make that as well. So they're quite interesting to look at. The color, they all on the paler side, but then it's not the palest. Peregrine's rosé is one of the more pale one. They use 92% of Bendigo fruit and only 8% from pizza. I found this one the most elegant, very expressive, really aromatic, dry and textural. And you see some really nice flintiness from that. Like Cameron talked about, like the soil minerality. And then Mount Michael's, they also blend Bendigo and pizza fruit, but the flavor profile is totally different. It's very orange and tangelo with a little bit of strawberry fruit and a bit meatiness to that as well. It's also a dry style, but it has some like toffee apples, but I think it's more to do with the winemaking, and they do a little bit of old oak wild ferment, more textural, but you really see the low yield of the concentration again. Rockburn Stolen Kiss, another very different rosé. They are from various sites. They didn't really list any particular space. But also very expressive, really fruitier style. They have higher residual sugar. There are 14 grams of residual sugar. But the finish of it, like it's just really sherbety of acidity. I think that it just comes out very nicely balanced, that it didn't really think that it was that much sugar when I was tasting that. Although you do feel that it's quite different to the others. And I think from that, I see the common thing of 2021 white rosé all have really good concentration, very expressive, and I like the nicely balanced acidity. It's not as much as 2020, and also the fruit is quite tropical, slightly more riper style. Yeah, and that's conclude 2021 for me. And I have I got sent 5 Pinot Noir. They're all from 2020. They're very, very different to compare. So I got Maud, which I tasted first. As I expected, they would be a lighter style compared to the others. They're from 51% from the Lowburn area and the other 49 from Queensbury. 21% whole bunch and 10 months in barriques. I think it's quite a low percentage of new oak. This is very, very floral, really pretty, good concentration. It's just like when we were talking about the very big style of Pinot that people were expecting before. This is so elegant. This is totally something else. And then I got Super Nanny from Nanny Goat. They blend from 4 different sub-regions. There are 34% from Pizza, 33% from Queensbury, and 28% from Gippsland, and then another 5% from Bannockburn. This one is a very much a winemaking stylistic creation, I would say. You taste all those different fruit, like you have those red spectrum from the cooler region, and then you have the blacker fruit from the warmer ones. A total of 8% average of whole bunch, but they use quite the oak that comes out of this is quite a bit more. It's quite a bulky, big fruit style. Just really, this is the highest brand, higher quality brand of their top wine. But I suppose that they're trying to make it a little bit more longevity, that with a bit more new oak in it. Although they say that they use 25%, but it shows up really quite toasty. It's quite high extraction, so like you get those really grippiness from the tannins, and quite minty finish. This one is quite hard to pick off like a vintage look of it, because I think there are more winemaker influence of that. But you certainly see the acidity that is really coming out. And then I have Wild Earth Pinot Noir 2020, which is a blend of Bannockburn, Pizza, and Bendigo. Average 18% whole clusters and 25% new oak for 12 months. Very lovely concentration again. Quite savory and earthy. Very velvety tannins, and this, I think this is really more showing a house style of wine. Rockburn Pinot 2020, fuller expression, also tasting the concentration, more black pepper, but also more toastiness from the oak as well, like really roasted coffee, silky and integrated acid. Quite powerful wine with quite spicy finish. And then I have one more, which is Akaroa Pinot Noir. I think this is actually a Bannockburn multi-site blend. So this is actually 100% Bannockburn, from 86% from Camus Vineyard, and then another 14% from the Felton Terrace. That wine has a really good elegancy, like the 17, like a really, they're usually quite structured. Like Bob said, like the Bendigo is quite structured, quite good tannin, but you really see that acidity that comes through, and the concentration, and the expression. I think this wine is just sort of, maybe it needs a little bit more time on it as just one sub-region. The other seems to be, maybe it's from the blending of different sites. I think they're quite a bit more ready to drink. So 2020, I feel that that's more cooler vintage expression. Still mix of red fruit and black fruit, but like a slightly higher acidity than 21. Lots of concentration and really tasting the skins in the wine. That's it.
Thanks, Candice. Yeah, I think you're right. You probably had one of the harder tasks trying to weave through sub-regional blends, and actually kind of nice that you finished there on the Akaroa from Bannockburn, which probably highlights the moldability of being able to work with sub-regional blends and use and utilize different aspects to create a wine. I can imagine those winemakers that worked with those sub-regional blends, that there'd be far longer time spent on the blending table trying to put those together. So a difficult task for yourself to weave through and navigate that, but also I think probably equally difficult task trying to put those blends together, and there'd be all sorts of permutations going on the blending table. I might just thanks for that, Candice. That was great, and I think what's also clear is a theme that's coming through is again, I think that respectfulness of handling the vintage conditions, and highlighting and promoting and embracing certain aspects of a vintage, whether that be acidity, fruit concentration, etc., and then layering in those extra components, as you touched on, with oak and whole bunch, whether that means wines are ready to drink or more ready in a few years' time, as another story. I might, before we just go into a group discussion, I might just quickly flip back over to Bob on Bannockburn, and I think Candice finishing on that Akaroa example. Bob, if you don't mind, I probably cut you a wee bit short, and you weren't able to really dive too deep into the Pinot Noir. But would you mind just spending a couple of extra minutes, Bob, on some of the examples that you taste? You don't need to go through each one, but maybe just in light of the sub-region and the 2020 vintage, please.
Oh, okay. Right. I'm unprepared for this, but
sorry, Bob.
I'll have to get my I'll just have to get my notes up. Hang on. Sorry. Right, here we go.
Thank you.
All right, so, well, I'll actually, this also gives me an opportunity when I had to summarize my thoughts on the Bannockburn Pinot Noir style. which I tried to do, but I realized I didn't talk about texture, and I think that's one of the key points of some of the best Bannockburn Pinot Noirs have this lovely silken texture, lovely mouthfeel, very seductive stuff, and that can be pushed into the sort of fruit bomb end of the scale, which is less impressive, a pure fruit bomb, or but with a bit of structure that helps. You know, I just have a look at my the Calvert, the Felton Road Calvert 2020, which has always been, the Calvert Vineyard has always been an appealing wine to me. I thought it was elegant, a little bit more firmly structured than an average vintage. I got sort of some quite nice florals going on in the wine, lovely spicy notes, and sort of classic sort of red cherry. I thought it was just a little closed at this stage. I think the tannins are sort of tightening it up, but it's got room to it's going to develop well with a bit of bottle age. Let's have a look now. There we go. Just looking at another favorite. I like the Valli very much. That's 2020 Valli Bannockburn Pinot. I thought it intense, vibrant wine. Once again, the typical sort of plum, cherry, berry flavors, touch of herbs and spice, and I thought that showed a little bit of whole bunch work, and just nice. It was a sort of combination between mellowness, a sort of ripe mellowness, and high energy. So we've got just almost the best of both worlds. Slightly edgy, but just really worked quite well. I've actually written on my notes, maybe a product of a cool vintage, or perhaps you know, a whole bunch of influence. So what else we got? Let's have a look. Oh, Dicey, the Bannockburn, Dicey Bannockburn. Look like that wine. Softer, I put softer and more fragrant than most Bannockburn Pinot Noir from this vintage. Medium bodied with cherry berry, herb, a little bit of struck flint and spicy oak. I thought appealing wine made with a light touch, you know, which I think is a good thing. No temptation to overwork or extract that wine. The Bald Hills 3 Acres 2020, moderately intense, once again firmly structured, typical of the vintage. Cassis, sort of some concentrated sort of cassis, plum, berry, wood smoke flavors. I got some little bit of oak influence there. Vibrant and appealing, approachable now, promises to mellow with bottle age. I just wonder whether the 2020 vintage is going to produce some long distance runners. You know, it's with that extra concentration and extraction, that could be the case.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be the case, Bob. And I think what's nice is that you've alluded to both the intensity but also the finesse. And I think that's what's super special about, you know, where we're heading as a region is and I've mentioned it a couple of times now, is getting that equation right. And knowing how to handle the fruit, and knowing when to hold back and when things need to be done. So I like, that's nice. What's been great to hear from all four of you is how eloquently you've described the wines you've tasted and the themes you've drawn. from either the sub-regions you've been assigned, or in Candice's case, the sub-regional blend. So we're very grateful for your ability to be able to describe those wines to us and share your thoughts. I thought now we're about bang on time, and I thought now I might just throw in a few questions, some of which Bob answered earlier, but I think if we can answer them as a group or discuss them as a group perhaps, and then we might have time to, if there are any questions from some of the members that have joined in, we can address those. For me, that one thing that's been quite clear is, I think just about all of you have mentioned the Pinot Noir of time gone by, and I think that's part of the reason why we wanted to take this dive into sub-regionality and vintage conditions, and hear from you all about that evolution. Sam, maybe if we start with you, and just build on your thoughts from earlier, not just from the Bendigo, Northburn and Alex sub-regions, but the region as a whole, and then we'll just work through each of you if that's okay.
Right, yeah, it's a tricky thing to work through, isn't it? I mean, you want Pinot Noir to be varietally expressive. On top of that, you want to express the region or sub-region or as a whole region. And you want Central Otago Pinot Noir to taste like Central Otago Pinot Noir, not from elsewhere. So without losing that sort of generosity, if I can put it that way, of the region. So you're not dialing back too far, that, you know, in pursuit of elegance. So having just that right balance of that ripeness and richness and generosity and mouthfeel, while maintaining that grace and purity. And I'm really excited with the 2020 vintage. While there were some of them had that sort of the herbal influence, that whole bunch perhaps, or other spicy nuances coming through, but the fruit quality and the purity shown through all of the Pinot's been quite amazing. So yeah, no, I think just so small steps, I think, that to bring consumers along with us, and some of them won't discover the elegance of Central Otago Pinot because they're sort of stuck in the old ways. But if we can just bring along the new consumers and some of the existing ones, that, you know, this is about region and variety together, expressing what Central Otago Pinot Noir is different from other regions and other countries. So yeah, no, I think it's you guys on a good path there.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I think you're 100% right that taking those small steps, and that's in the vineyard and understanding the vines and the site better, and in the winery, with handling and direction and style, and I guess you guys are the sort of the glue in between, with connecting the consumer with what we're doing. So really appreciate your thoughts there, Sam, on what we're endeavouring to achieve, and then obviously what you're able to pick up in the direction that we're heading. So thank you. Cameron, do you mind? I'll move on to you. I might, if you've got thoughts on that question, please fire away. But also, could you build on that too, if you may, just around white wines in general and rosé, and don't want all the conversation to be about Pinot Noir. And I think you touched on it with sub-regionality streaks in the rosés and the others that you tasted. So yeah, if you could fire away on that topic, please.
I'll give it a try. Thank you. I mean, I want to echo what Sam just said, and certainly Bob and Candice's comments before. I guess we're in a position also that we get to taste wines regardless of variety from around New Zealand and often from overseas as well. And so we have the benefit of perspective that's often immediate with the wines that we sample throughout our working life, our daily working life. And so when we are faced with tasting a Riesling from Otago or a Pinot Blanc or a Chardonnay, we immediately notice what those standout points are, what separates these wines from perhaps others that we have tasted recently or in a bracket. And I have to, you know, say again, one of the signatures of Central Otago that comes through, perhaps more in the white wines because of that cool climate aspect, is the underlying, call it earthy mineral sense of place, whatever you want to call it, is actually quite strong. Sub-regionality is a slow-moving beast. That is something that I think is going to be driven by vine age, and let that happen. So again, it's not a race, but the advantage of location that you have as well is, apart from the weather bombs that come and hit you from time to time and unexpected challenges, that you have the benefit of a largely disease-free environment there, and that will allow you to move your vineyard programs, your wine styles forward, but at a slow and steady pace. There is no rush once again. So the idea of, you know, it's not about displacing Pinot Noir in favor of these other varieties. I think Pinot Noir is the, you know, the tip of the spear that, you know, was driving the industry down there. But coming quickly behind that are these other varieties that are saying we can express as much personality and style as Pinot Noir is doing. And I think you're seeing that very clearly in Sauvignon Blanc. I think you're seeing that very clearly in Chardonnay. And, you know, the Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris, they are great, you know, for want of a better term, money spinners for the industry down there. But they are the slight outliers, in my opinion. I think the Chardonnay, your Sauvignon Blanc and your Riesling are part of that story moving forward. So slow and steady steps, to echo Sam, and let the vineyard lead that story, please.
Yeah, no, very, very wise words. Thank you, Cameron. I think it's an exciting time to see the evolution of Central Otago white varietals, and it's great to hear your insight into some of those aspects that you've seen in the wines you've tried for this review. And I think if we can continue down this path of respecting site and working with the vintage conditions, then we'll continue to see these wines of great intensity and purity in the whites, textural elements and Gris and Chardonnay, etc. And then obviously continuing that story of Pinot Noir.
Can I also add quickly that
please,
you've got a wonderful opportunity here where you've got the original winemakers, will say, from Central Otago, still part of that story, and they're able to actually hand over, and you're on the cusp of this change where the next generation of winemakers are coming through. The gender balance is amazing, and you've got the benefit of history weaving its way through into the next generation, which is a rare thing, I think, in New Zealand. Yeah, and it's one of those advantages that Bob alluded to as well, that that marketing momentum, that storyline, so long as it's not sold in favor of money, it's sold in favor of quality, then the future is looking very, very good. Yeah,
thanks, Cameron. And just further to that, you know, it's amazing to be part of the wine community down here, and it is you know, very, very tight, helpful, supportive community. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. To be able to call on that knowledge of the pioneering winemakers that are still here and making wine and involved in the day-to-day. For someone like myself who's part of that next generation, and the likes of Mike too, from a vineyard perspective, it can only be good, that handover of knowledge, that understanding of site, and that, I guess, that going back to that respectful nature of growing and making. So thank you. That's a really nice observation to touch on. Cheers. Candice, I might throw it over to you now, just seeing as you're the local, even though you're zooming in from Queenstown. down the road. But we put together a few questions for everybody, and what would be nice to hear from you, I think, is your view of how people see Central Otago wines and steps towards promoting the region, particularly in these times where we're doing virtual discussions and virtual tastings and that sort of thing. It'd be really cool to hear your insight around those topics.
I think Central Otago is a very, very good brand. A lot of consumers that I know that they would only pick Central Otago Pinot Noir. Just because maybe it's our tourism part that we do very well, and they act like Queenstown is such an attraction and sort of draw off to Central Otago traveling. I think we have that advantage there to sell the wines as well as a destination. There's no doubt about it. Like Central Otago is one favorite Pinot Noir region in the country, and a lot of people would just look for that. Like doesn't really matter what brand it is, but it's from Central Otago, then people would be likely to try it. I think in terms of promotions, consistency is very important. It is a shame that a lot of big events that's been cancelled this last couple of years, and I think that we really need to rethink what you can do as a region, because you can't do those big 3 days Pinot celebration to open to international consumers already. So I think when it's allowed, I think there should be some smaller tastings. I think a few months ago that we did the hospital, which is a great way to go. And also I think within New Zealand, it would be really good to have something like a Pinot Palooza, but it's a Central Otago theme wine events like that. I think it's really boost up the name as a promotion, and loads of people connections. But I don't know, such a big event would when will we ever get back to that yet? Or otherwise that will have to be smaller sit-down tastings. And other than that, it's I don't understand why this country hasn't sold out those little bottles to send out to do tastings. There are so many tastings overseas has been done already, like Canada or Australia, China. They've all done that for New Zealand wine growers. I don't understand why we aren't really doing this here. And also social media is really big, and I just don't see the consistencies in those promotions. It's always very project type, but I think maybe a little bit more consistency would be good on those things.
Yeah, I agree, Candice. I think there are definitely challenges ahead and potentially opportunities missed, but I think that's all just learnings, and I think that's really good insight into from your perspective where we're at, or what direction we could go in terms of events and virtual tastings. I've thought the same thing myself. There's all sorts of logistics involved with bottling small, very tiny things and labels, etc. But I think it's an opportune time to look overseas and see what others are doing and what's been successful, and build on that. And I think what's clear is, and it's really great talking to you guys, is because it's a nice reminder of how fortunate we are, I think, as a region, to what we have. You mentioned the strength of brand. We've all mentioned the evolution of sub-regions, etc. So yeah, it's there for the taking, and it's up to us to push that ahead. I might, Bob, I'll head over to you, ask your question in a second. I just wanted to bring Mike back into the chat. My sidekick here has been sitting patiently, probably wondering what's happening out at Bendigo at the moment. But I just wanted, Mike, if you could just chat to us a bit about viticulture, the two vintages we've had, and viticulturally what you've seen and what you think the future holds, say, for, or what we've got coming ahead in 2022.
Sure. Yeah, well, the last two seasons for me were the first at Peregrine as viticulturist, and we are largely Bendigo based. So we have a small amount of fruit that we take off from Gippsland, and we also take in fruit from Pisa as well as part of our sub-regional blends. So blessed with a fantastic season in 2020 for me, and it's a really good season for me to understand what the blocks, how they perform, because the fruit quality was fantastic. The weather conditions at harvest were very good. It allowed me to see the fruit coming through and in its truest form, I suppose, without the interruption of disease or significant weather events that might cause us to take different chain of events or different course of action. So what I found, it's a particularly difficult site in Bendigo, and there are many aspects to that site over there in terms of soil type. And I think sub-region can be broken down into further sub-regions in terms of soil types. If you look at Bannockburn, for example, we have the Kenmure ends and you have the Felton road ends, and they're almost chalk and cheese in terms of soil type, with various aspects of those being quite heavy in sand than the Kenmure end, and then we've got clays and limestones in the Bannockburn Felton road end. So Bendigo is no different. If we look forward to the 2021 vintage, was again another good season. We've had slightly higher yields, as I mentioned earlier, across the region. That varied a lot depending on timing of flowering, perhaps. Bendigo might have got lucky in terms of having a good window of flowering that was exceptional weather, allowed us to have a better yield in 2021. So we're starting to see some really good flavours coming through. And I think what's really important to look at in terms of it as a region and moving ahead is that we're starting to understand. We talked about having confidence in your vines and the fruit quality and the style that your vineyards are producing. And we're in a transition period for a lot of growers, whether it be from young vines moving and getting age, or perhaps transitioning from conventional to organics. So there's a lot that's going on, a lot of variables are happening in the vineyard. And I think it's going to take some time for us to get vine age and for us to get into organics. If we're in conversion, for example, and see how our vineyards react. Or if it's not organics, it might be a herbicide reduction or changes that we're making. Everyone's working to improve what we're doing. And what's great about Central Otago is we're of a scale where we can afford to take these chances or experiment to a certain extent and get a better understanding of how our fruit performs under different circumstances. So I think it's going to be about getting confidence in our fruit and confidence in our style and confidence in what our vineyards are doing and how they're translating into wine quality. I think from a grower point of view, getting that understanding of vineyard performance and a number of aspects such as water management are key. We're making some quite significant changes in our water management. I think there used to be very much a cookie cutter approach to water management where it was throw an hour of water on this block and an hour of water on that block. And we're finding that we can manipulate things a lot more in the vineyard if we just think about the way we're doing things and think about how we're growing and how that translates into the winery and the fruit quality. So I think for a young viticulturist moving forward, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to understand. There are a lot of new things that we can try. And it's all about questioning why we're doing what we're doing, why we've done them a certain way, and perhaps how we can improve and work on what we're doing to get a better product, get a better drop in the winery. So a lot of work to be done, improvements to be had, but that's why it's exciting, it's challenging, and we're not just happy with the status quo. We're always working harder to produce a better product.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. I think what's clear is from Mike's sentiment, I think the four of you have seen those elements or seen what we're working on down here in the wines themselves. And I think it's that going through maybe through the teenage years and maturing as a region. So again, a super exciting position to be in. Bob, can I just ask you, with your great knowledge of the region and vintages gone by, your version of we'll just stick with Pinot Noir for a second and the region as a whole, your interpretation of the 2020s, how do you see those sitting alongside some of the great vintages that have gone past in Central Otago?
Yeah, well, I'd like to taste a few more wines.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to just get them on the computer and just go through them. I have tasted quite a number of 2020s, but I think from what I've seen in this small sample, I think it's I don't know whether I'd call it a great vintage, a classic vintage, but it's certainly a very good vintage. So depending on what the majority that I haven't tasted I like, I give it the thumbs up, that's for sure.
Great.
I was just going to say, if I got time to say, just tell you a little story. I just wrote an article on regional Pinot Noir styles a while back, and at the end of it, I thought, could I, in a blind tasting of 5 regions, pick the regions? So I got my wife to go to First Class Wines in Takapuna and buy a bottle of Pinot Noir from 5 different regions.
Yeah.
And come up and set me up with a blind tasting, and it was very difficult, I have to say. I got 3 out of the 5 right, because if you get 1 wrong, you've got to get 2 wrong. But the banker, the easiest one, the standout one, the first one that I picked and correctly was the Central Otago Pinot. I can't remember what it was. Yeah, but I pondered afterwards, why did that stand out in the crowd? And it was density and texture that really made it put its head above the parapet. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't get the sort of regional stamp on the other wines nearly as clearly as I did on the Central Otago wine, and that's a good thing. That's, you've got to make it in the high price world of premium wine. You've got to be very good, and you've got to be distinctive.
Yeah,
and that's a success with Marlborough Sauvignon. It's very good and distinctive. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's thank you for sharing that the results of the exercise with us, Bob. That's it's great to hear. 100% agree. The distinctiveness, it's key to the brand. It's a component of quality. The fruit intensity and concentration, to me, is always across all varietals in Central Otago. When I'm tasting things outside of the region, gently reminded of how fortunate we are to be able to work with that level of concentration in our wines. I just wondered if any of you actually had questions for each other before we head out to see if there's any questions from the members from your experience in the tasting. No? Okay, that's good. Good. I might just have to check with my technical expert across from me. If anyone's, those that are still tuned in, have you got any questions for our reviewers? You'll have to unmute. No? That's okay. Wait another second.
Yeah. Actually, let me ask a question if I can. Let's get these guys to turn off their sound for a second. I'll have to mute again. If you do that, just hang on a second. Mute.
Okay.
Sorry about that technical issue of having 2 PCs next to each other on the same table here. Given the exercise that you just spoke about, Bob, maybe I could just ask for Sam, Cameron, and Candice, the same question. It was something that I've thought about quite a bit. How much is the distinctive character of Central Otago viewed now compared to maybe what it was in the past? Are we seeing other regions become closer in style, or are we seeing more gap in the style between the various regions?
Okay, I'll go first. Very good question. If you ask Pinot produced in Marlborough, and some of them will admit that they want to make their Pinot like Central Otago, while the others, they want to make distinct, if you have got good vineyard in Southern Valleys, they want to make Southern Valleys Pinot Noir to express. And I think in general, I think the styles somewhat emerged between the regions, and we talked about Central Otago styles change over the last couple of decades, and I think it's important to distinguish those regions, and I think they are different. And obviously, at the lower price point, Pinot Noir tastes more like Pinot rather than Marlborough Pinot or Central Otago Pinot. But as we go up the price point and get more serious, and those Marlborough Pinots look very different, and Martinborough's is the same. And I think, yeah, given time, and I think more education, and Central Otago has been brilliant in marketing, but and do those bigger events like Candice mentioned, but also I think if you continue to educate those smaller groups, like to wine club tastings or whatever, and to really kind of inform those Pinot enthusiasts that drinking Pinot not because it's fashionable and that's what you drink when you go out to impress others, but they truly understand and enjoy, and knowing the style differences. So just going back to your question, Andy, yeah, I think it style between regions getting more individual at the top price point, and I think it's good to see.
I'll go next. One of the questions that was written down here: do you think consumers have a strong opinion of Central Otago wines, and are Central Otago wines premium price often associated with the wines? And I think in order to answer those two questions, Central Otago is in its own bubble. It is so different from really any other wine region in New Zealand that making a comparison is often a waste of time, because stylistically those wines are quite recognizable, and Bob's experiment proves that straight away. And if anything, to answer the question, the gap is getting a little bit wider, I think, Andy, because Central Otago will always deliver in a certain genre. And the rest of New Zealand is subject to so much impact of weather and vintage conditions, perhaps more so than Central Otago does. So you're very blessed. I wouldn't say lucky, but you're blessed with where you are situated. And to go back to those questions, the expectations are really high of Central Otago wines, but by all means, don't rest on your laurels as well. You still have to, be true to your own philosophy. And what is the expectation from the consumer is very high expectation. It's the Disneyland effect. It's like, wow, Central Otago, it's going to be expensive, but it better well damn be good. So it's getting that equation right, but never lose sight of where you are and what you're doing. And I think that, again, you're blessed with what you've got in terms of all the varieties that you're growing, especially Pinot Noir, of course, because that is that's the captain's chair, we'll say, of the ship that is Central Otago. Yeah.
Thanks, Cam, and thanks for that question, Andy. I think you know, it's been clear throughout the discussion that we've got all the hallmarks of greatness that we're just sort of putting together in the puzzle, and as Cam has just said, you know, we're blessed to have viticultural and climatic conditions in our favour. We're blessed with the people and the winemakers and the pioneers that are still here, and we're blessed with a strong brand. So it's an exciting time to keep building on that. Have we got? I think we've got another question from.
Can I just add?
Oh,
can
sorry.
I just add?
Yes, please.
I don't think Central Otago Pinot is expensive. Like when you look at the world Pinot Noir price, you know, it is really not, and it's very consistently satisfying, which is why it is such a strong brand. So I think yeah, don't start pricing down.
Yeah.
But I think we should more moving upward to increase value.
100% agree. It's particularly as we're evolving as a region, for sure, and the consistent quality that comes out, irrespective of the vintage, as Cam has suggested. So yeah, you're 100% correct, and a lot of people will be happy to hear that from you too. Thank you, Candice. Misha, can you unmute there, Misha, and ask your question, please?
Absolutely. Bob, you mentioned, you were talking about the colour of rosé and saying how your students and the feedback was that the paler was the better. However, then you also talked about how Pinot Noir from Central Otago has that density and texture in it. So just thinking back on that, given that the rosés we're producing are Pinot Noir rosés, and the longer the cold soak, the more you're getting some of that density and texture. What goes along with that is a deeper colour rosé than those Provence rosés, and one would argue that the colour is associated with the winemaking that we need to do in order to get that density and texture. So should we be trying to follow the trend, or should we be saying no, our rosés are not the sort of Provence style of rosé? They have that density and texture that mirror where our Pinot Noirs are. Now, I know you'll possibly just say, well, if you can make it dark and sell it, that's fine. And it is a case of selling the wine. But there is always that contradiction between trying to have the Pinot Noir in that pale colour, but still giving it the thing that makes the central rosés so distinctive.
I wouldn't compromise the wine quality or style for colour. I think you know that's got to come first. It's just a conflict, actually. It's perhaps there's a point in the middle somewhere that might work. I don't know. I just pass that on. I personally don't give a stuff what the colour looks like. It doesn't matter to me at all. But it is an issue with some rosé drinkers. But my wife, for example, will not drink a rosé that's not uber pale. She's normal in other respects, and I'm getting counselling for her. But you know, it's a fact, and you've got to work through that to decide whether, you know, perhaps you can retain some of the virtues of a deeper coloured rosé and produce it pale. I don't know. I don't understand the technology.
I think it's a great question from you, Misha, and a you know, constant battle from within the winemaking teams and winemakers, and I think part of the gap there is education, and obviously you know, there's been a tendency to follow trends maybe, but I think what should be first and foremost is that intensity of flavour and the quality. So are there any more questions from the panelists? Just unmute and go ahead and ask a question if you do. Otherwise, we'll work towards wrapping up. No? Okay, great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Really great to have you in a virtual room all together and hearing your thoughts. It's been a great dive into not only two unique vintages or very different vintages, but also a great insight into sub-regionality, what they bring to a wine, and also what they offer in blends as well. I hope you've enjoyed the format. I've certainly found it, to me, as a really nice reminder of the position we're in down here in Central Otago. So I must thank, while I'm here, thank Gretchen, who's done all the tech stuff behind the scenes, and Mike, who's shared his viticultural perspective. I hope that we can do this again. Obviously, in person would be amazing, but perhaps more of these are a great way to discuss together with some targeted tastings. So with that, I will say thank you very much. Thank you for your generous offer of time to spend 2 hours with us talking over Zoom. We're glad you've enjoyed all the wines, and we've really enjoyed your insight into the vintages and the sub-regions. Hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.